are coordinated by a voluntary planning group, and this is a list of our current members of the colleagues that we meet on a monthly basis and work to try and bring all these events to you. So just want to say thank you. Quite a few of them are on the call today. Thank you ever so much for all of your work and contributions and effort and energy in keeping the network going across the year. Your efforts are much appreciated. So what we do, we've got sort of 4 main objectives for the network. And I think the sort of primary one is about helping building that community, that IR community in the sector, and to be a kind of forum for discussion and sharing ideas and good practice. And I think one of our unique selling points as a network is how kind of open, friendly, accessible, inclusive we are in that. We also then try and engage with, work with policymakers to try and have a real impact on HE policy and practice as well. Although there's of course always more we could do in that space, but we're making some small steps, which is positive. So as part of our kind of efforts to build this community and share good practice, we now have this online session series for usually Friday lunchtimes, and there's a few examples there of some of the ones that we've run over the last few years, ranging from league tables to equality charters to educational gains to access and participation plans. So they're what we run online, but we also have our kind of main event, which is our in-person, pleased to say, post-COVID, back to in-person annual conference. And that's the list of the institutions that we've visited as part of our annual conference programme. We had a fabulous time at BNU, Bucks New University, back in September. And I'm delighted to say that this is where we shall be heading this September, next September 25, we'll be going to the University of East Anglia and having our in-person conference there on the 4th and 5th of September around the theme of student access, retention and outcomes, harnessing the evidence. And we've secured already, hot off the press, our first keynote speaker, who is Professor Bart Rientes from the Open University. He's a professor in learning analytics. So if you're interested in that area, it'll be a kind of wide-ranging theme on retention, access and outcomes. Do save the date, and if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll hear lots more information about it, including this information on the timeline. So we'll be launching the call for papers possibly March, a bit earlier than there, but that's the kind of timeline for the conference. So keep your eyes on our website and sign up for our newsletter, and really hope to be able to see you in UEA in September. And if you, of course, we always put out a plea for, if you're interested in the network, if you want to find out more, if you're keen to get involved, drop us a line on any of those contacts there, and we'll get in touch, and we will look forward to speaking to you about how you might get more involved. So on that note, I'm now going to hand over to Matt, and he's going to kick us off with the main business of the day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, you may have noticed that recording has started for this session. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, then please keep your cameras off. We'll be turning off the recording for the question and answer session that will follow the main presentation from colleagues at the University of Westminster. And we would prefer anyone posing a question to appear on camera, but really the first priority is that we want a lot of questions to work through. So please post questions in the chat during the presentation, and I'll work through them afterwards, trying to group them by theme. And I will invite the poser of questions to come on and articulate it in their own words, but it's not necessary, only if you want to. So I'd like to introduce Kirsty and Matthew from the University of Westminster, who will be describing their recent approach to implementing AI for qualitative analysis and its implications for institutional research. Matthew Abley from is from the University of Westminster, is Institutional Research Analyst and joined the university from TASO, the Centre for Transforming Access and Student Outcomes. Most of his career to date has seen him working in the third sector, implementing and evaluating data-driven approaches to enhancing students' academic success through tuition and mentoring, as well as addressing inequalities in access to higher education. His current institutional research is focused upon student experience. Also speaking is Kirsty Bryant, Senior Institutional Research Analyst at the University of Westminster and overseeing the university's institutional research. She's worked in HE for over 15 years in research and insight, delivering qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research projects. Kirsty has pioneered qualitative insight at the University of Westminster, establishing the student experience and opinion panel in 2019 as a mechanism for the student voice, and more recently introducing innovative AI analysis tools, which is what we're going to hear more about today, and a topic on which Kirsty has published articles and presented globally. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Kirsty and Matthew to do the initial presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I will just bring up the presentation and we'll get started. Fab. Can somebody verbally confirm that they can see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Super. Thank you. Yes, so I will start our presentation today. First of all, thank you to Matt and Rachel for having us, and thank you for everyone for taking some time out of your Friday to come and listen to us talk. So the title of our presentation is Leveraging AI to Drive Data-Driven Decision Making. So we'll talk through our process before. I'll introduce the University of Westminster for those who are unfamiliar. Kirsty will talk through our team, what we do, what our focuses are, and then we'll work through a couple of sort of case study examples of the then and now of how we were doing things before and what the implementation of AI has done for those processes and its implications therein. And then I will move on to talk specifically about a piece of institutional research that has been enabled by our implementation of AI and how we've gone about making sure that that is both robust in its evaluation, but also making sure that in terms of institutional research and impact, we've made sure those findings go where they need to. And we'll finish off with a couple of our thoughts and feelings about lessons learned through our implementation of AI and machine learning models, as well as advice, maybe is the best way to put it, for anyone thinking about doing a similar thing. So the University of Westminster, based in London, in the UK, and we are a post-92 provider, so only became a university in the way we all understand it not very long ago. Prior to that, the slide should say 1892, but we were a polytechnic from then until 1992. We're a TEF Silver institution, and we teach a broad range of subjects to an extremely varied student body. We currently serve between 19 and 20,000 students from about 158 countries, and students range in ages from 18 to 60 plus upon entry. A further demographic disaggregation of our student body by EDI categories reveals that there's a lot of really diverse intersectionality within our student body. And so, as you might assume, there are as many student experiences to understand as there are potential avenues to collect data about them. And Kirsty will talk a little bit about how our team works, but there's a lot going on at the University of Westminster, and part of what we'll talk about today is the scale and manageability of collecting that wealth of student data and harnessing it for actionable insight. And that is where the institutional research team comes in. So I shall hand it over to Kirsty.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. So I'll give you a bit of background into the institutional research team. We're a very small team, just 3 people, but we are mighty in our efforts towards encouraging data-driven decision-making. We sit within the university's strategy, planning and performance department, which is part of professional services. And we have a couple of primary functions. The first is the management and analysis of a myriad of data streams which flow through our team. Principally, we work to collect, amplify and enhance the influence of the student voice at the university. To do so, we oversee the distribution of both quant and qualitative analysis of things like internal and external surveys. So examples of external surveys include things like the NSS, the National Student Survey, Postgraduate Taught Experience Survey, otherwise known as PTES, and the Graduate Outcome Survey, otherwise known as GO, as well as a bunch of our internal surveys where we have, for example, a longitudinal self-assessment employability skills audit survey. Back in 2019, I set up our Student Experience and Opinion panel, and my team continues to successfully manage this. The Student Experience and Opinion panel, or CEOP as we like to call it, is essentially a database of students that we have from across the university. So students opt in to participate in research projects throughout the academic year. A lot of focus goes into promoting this panel, conducting keep warm activities, as well as into the research itself. And projects vary in scope and research methodologies. So examples include focus groups for a project on understanding students' engagement with central communications. We've also done one-to-one interviews to better understand students' experiences and needs of our students who are carers. So they're caring alongside work, alongside studying. All of the projects we run utilising the CEOP deepens our understanding of the student experience with a view of bettering their experience while studying with us. Our second major function is our work with internal stakeholders at various levels of seniority. Through our analysis or our design of institutional research projects, we bolster the data value chain by transforming data into insight and insight into evaluated action. Next slide, please, Matthew. Thank you. So whether by our own design or in support of colleagues conducting their own projects, we find ourselves perpetually somewhere in this cycle when gathering student voice via surveys. Notably, this cycle doesn't feature any explicit mention of qualitative analysis. And whilst there is a clear place for it to sit, the two sister outputs of quant and qual have historically been at odds in their rapidity and therefore availability and impact. As a team, and as you've seen through the CEOP, we are well versed in quantitative and qualitative measures. We're also well versed in creating dashboards for reporting KPIs, especially for surveys like the NSS, and this is a metric driving survey with influence on things like league table positioning, TEF, that kind of thing. So it's hardly surprising that quantitative takes focus. However, there is a wealth of qualitative data in surveys like the NSS. And each year in our NSS survey, we receive around 3,000 comments. And this gives us a huge amount of insight into why a certain metric might be going up or going down. Next slide, please. But as we all know, qualitatively analysing free text commentary provided by the NSS is a huge Herculean task. Aside from the two of us on the call, as I mentioned, we've only got one other member in the institutional research team. So consequently, our qualitative analysis circle outlined on the slide here used to take us several weeks to complete qualitative analysis in code generation for something like the NSS. And actually, prior till we had the mini tool, to address that issue of capacity, I used to recruit student researchers to aid the process of coding qualitative data and analysing that data set. So I did this for about 3 or 4 years with NSS data. And typically what would happen was I would start in March of that academic year, advertising roles to students, conducting interviews, and then crucially training students up to quite a high standard as qualitative analysis, getting them used to coding, getting them used to things like NVivo, that kind of thing. I'd then work with the students over the summer, so when the data was released, we would conduct the analysis of the NSS. So how I would perform that is I would get one student to look at one school data set, and then a second student to also blind code that, and we'd then compare that data and decide on coding structures. That would take us all the way up to September of conducting that analysis, creating a presentation and reporting it back to colleagues. So from start to end, that process would take in the region of 6 months to do. So although the work was done, the new NSS cycle would be looming, and the commencement of that new academic year inhibited the opportunity for pre-semester changes to be made. Thus, a wealth of qualitative insight was left untapped, and our ability to translate insight into action was limited. As a team, we would better understand the why behind quantitative measures of the NSS, but our capacity and timing to communicate those insights, though well received, was limited in its impactfulness. So we wanted to look at ways to improve this process with the aim of making our qualitative insight more impactful. We wanted to increase our capabilities to analyse not just the NSS open comments, but a range of other surveys and where we collect open comments text from too. And crucially, we wanted that process to be a lot quicker. So we looked at 4 possible pathways as shown on the screen. So in our considerations, we thought, do we increase the number of student researchers we hire each year to make it quicker? Do we send our data sets to external research companies in the hope that they can code comments for us? Do we buy an off-the-shelf AI model and teach it some form of qualitative coding? Or do we buy an AI model that's already learnt a coding structure? Next slide, please. Thank you. In considering what solutions to bring on board, we had some key areas to consider. And again, I've shown them on screen. So first of all, with a myriad staff and student surveys across the academic year and an untapped wellspring of qualitative insight, our solution needed to be scalable. We needed a solution that would accommodate our intention to analyse not only major surveys like the NSS and PTES, but also free text responses from a broader spectrum of data sources pertaining to the experience of both students and our colleagues. The second point is that any chosen solution would need to be accurate, and this was a distinct non-negotiable. Back when I'd hired student researchers for the NSS, I employed measures to mitigate analytical subjectivity. So where I mentioned about in a previous slide, that intercoding reliability, getting one student to look at one data set, a second one to do it blind, and coming together with a discussion to agree on a coding. So any solution that we decided upon would need to have similar protocols or similar mitigations embedded. And for reference, the MILI platform, we know that Explorance employ that similar process of blind coding for code generation. The third point is thinking about personalisation. So having a combination of my team's institutional knowledge and previous analysis of the NSS meant that we already had a provider-specific code book that we worked with. It had Westminster language and it had coding that aligned to our priority areas. Again, any solution that we would go forward with would need to accommodate our way of speaking and be flexible enough to incorporate our way of describing findings in relation to university policy and strategy. Fourth point, and I'm sure you're all aware of time taken to manually code data, but rapidity, that was also a key. So any solution would need to be swift whilst maintaining accuracy and not compromising on quality. So those were 4 key considerations of what we wanted to do. We also needed to consider things like budget and data protection constraints. So in our solution, we thought we could hire more students. This would meet some of these needs, but wouldn't be quick. We could have used external market research agencies for coding, but when I went out to market research companies, a surprising number actually turned down even the opportunity to give us a quote because they didn't have qualitative data people on board in their companies. Additionally, we thought over time that might diminish our input of our institutional knowledge, where we had previously gone through the NSS with a lot of thorough coding, so we had that knowledge there. We could have found an off-the-shelf machine learning package like NViva's AutoCode or another one such as Monkey Learn, but this would require our team to teach that machine learning, and so that time would negatively impact that rapidity that we needed. I know that some other universities are currently thinking about using ChatGPT for some general kind of AI analysis, but I would caution against this for data protection purposes. Similarly, Copilot is now doing some kind of top line analysis. You can get main themes, but it can be useful in that discovery phase, but again, it's not as impactful as something like Mini. So our final option that we landed on was purchasing an LLM that had already been trained to code data and was trained using existing higher education data. So this was Mini. Mini is a machine learning AI application from a company called Explorance. It's it's software company working in the space of feedback and insight with a large focus on the HE sector. We first used Mini to analyse our qualitative results in our 2023 NSS. So we've been using it for 2 years now. And I was very surprised that it took just minutes to analyse a data set that used to take me and a team of students weeks to do. So it saved me so much time. We've since gone on to use it for the 2024 NSS, for our PTES, for our colleague wellbeing survey, and a number of other data sets. And we have plans to use it more widely across other surveys as we get more requests from different teams coming into us. As hoped, its use made that first step of the analysis process much simpler and much faster, allowing us to focus on that final and important stage of reporting actionable insight. We're able to combine our institutional knowledge with its student experience insights framework and build in our Westminster specific codebook so we can use the language we were already using in our reporting back. We're able to support the AI's interpretation of data by using a glossary of Westminster terms, feeding that into the model. So when it reads those Westminster terms, it understands what those mean. And we benefited from the programme's inbuilt analysis tools for filtering and visualising of qualitative data. So free from the quagmire of manual coding, we're able to focus on the fewest things that matter most, which is actionable insight for both short, medium and long-term improvements delivered at pace with data-driven insight. We have had time to step back and ask ourselves, where or what is the change that students want? How can we act to improve their experience, their contribution and their success? And what are the subtle differences that we can interrogate out of the data? In essence, we can now tell a story behind the numbers. So it's one thing to say, for example, that satisfaction scores regarding teaching might have raised or dropped in separate schools, but it's remiss to think that the reasons are the same. So we're now able to make personalised recommendations and action plans. We can work with leadership across the university to support pockets of potential growth and indeed identify areas of better practice that can be lauded and shared. So our use of Mini has brought to fruition the conditions of our deployment in the first place. It has allowed us to analyse the free text elements of a greater number of annual surveys both internal and external, and increase our capacity without increasing our workload. The tool has also meant that my team is more visible to others, and we're contacted by colleagues more often now to help analyse their data sets. So we're gaining also a better overview of what's happening across the institution. We are more capably what we're able to do now is triangulate Westminster's emergent quantitative and qualitative data with that of the national picture and match the rapidity of both sets of outputs. So both quant and qual can be released to colleagues at a similar pace at a similar time. The ability to complement the various data types has allowed us for a far more streamlined reporting process that empowers us to make sound recommendations in line with the university strategy, transforming insight into action through things like college executive groups, the University Planning Committee, University Exec Board, amongst others. And we can take on bespoke one-off projects or support the analysis of colleagues working on projects to improve the experience of students and staff. Those findings can be disseminated and acted upon in year. By way of an example, Matthew is now going to briefly talk you through about one such project. So I'll hand over back to Matthew.
Thank you, Kirsty. So the mentoring team, part of Westminster's Careers and Employability Services, run a three-pronged programme called Future Ready Mentoring. And work in this area contributes significantly towards our university priority of employability, as the FRM, the Future Ready Mentoring Programme, at large focuses on preparing participating students with employability skills and knowledge to enhance their prospects post-graduation. Mentors are sourced from the university's industry contacts and or via our alumni relations team. 3 programs. The Ask a Mentor program sees students participating in one-off conversations with a mentor. The Career Mentoring program sees students participating in structured long-term mentoring over the academic year. And group mentoring is embedded into the syllabus. Select courses have sessions scheduled into modules and students participate in them in groups. So 3 years after Future Ready Mentoring's inception and its pilot, we collaborated with the mentoring team to conduct an evaluation using pre and post survey data. Our evaluation using pre and post survey data resulted in our generation of type 2 evidence, so empirical evidence, according to the OFS standards. Our use of Millie to run the qualitative analysis meant that a rapid qualitative output could accompany statistical testing, which we conducted alongside. And we were able to report to the mentoring team in good time for changes to be made ahead of the start of the new academic year, changes that continuing participants would feel the benefit of. As well as closing the loop in this way, we were able to bolster the university's evidence base to support the targets set out under employability in our access and participation plan. So it's another move towards robust evaluative practice and an example of our team's capacity to support the brilliant but largely unassessed or unevaluated work going on across the institution. So the focus of Future Ready mentoring programs is raising employability outcomes and students' aspirations regarding post-graduation. It's exactly the kind of thing that is very meaningful work, but the evaluation of which the institutional research team and I would not have necessarily been able to take on previously. And the mentoring team's understanding was, anecdotally, that the programs were well liked by participants and numbers suggested there was an impact. We can all agree that these kind of light touch reviews do not translate effectively into actionable insights and less so into longer term impact. So I use this evaluation as an example of some of the things mentioned before in this presentation, namely how our employment of Millie as an AI and machine learning tool has enabled a deeper interrogation of qualitative data than we may otherwise have been able to provide, because it's created that space for us to move away from the analysis itself and the kind of manual coding process and focus on the reporting and integrating deeper insight into that data chain. So I mentioned that anecdotal evidence revealed participants' positive experiences of the FRM strands, and indeed the data sets revealed that experience were positive. At the top level of the coding framework, things like mentors' helpfulness and support and participants' knowledge and skills gain were the most frequent for each of the 3 program strands. But that's still a top-level similarity. The minutiae of the reasons differed, and dissection of the data using Millie allowed us to identify the different reasons why. So, for example, Ask a Mentor participants' responses focused on gaining answers to many of their specific questions, whether career, profession, or subject-oriented, whereas Mentor's helpfulness and support for career mentoring program participants came from the Mentor's pragmatism, their matter-of-factness, and their honesty about beginning in industry post-graduation. And further interrogation proved to show that this difference in experience, though subtle, I grant you, seemed to be down to aspects such as the length of pairings and the different approaches to preparation encouraged by the mentoring team at the point of matching. So the rapid qualitative analysis provided us with the space to streamline our recommendations and encourage change at more granular levels. We were able to make recommendations and suggest actions at a strand level rather than at a larger scale programmatic level. For example, selectivity and an element of choice in choosing mentors were of importance to career mentoring program participants, but not Ask a Mentor participants. Career mentoring participant pairings should be given a minimum number of target sessions to maximize impact. Group mentoring would benefit from the ability to submit questions in advance of their course embedded sessions, and guidance should be given to participants regarding the arrangement of sessions, about bottlenecks, and particularly pertaining to assessment periods. So moreover, aside from generating the recommendations, we had the space to work closely with the mentoring team in their review of our report and the beginning of their implementation of changes for the better. And in this way, and with an easily shareable and navigable platform such as Millie, we've been able to work as pseudo-consultants in the aftermath of the research. And this has been the same elsewhere on a number of different projects. So moving on to some of mine and Kirsty and the team at large's thoughts and learnings about our implementation of Millie. We've been working with it, as Kirsty said, for just shy of 2 years now. And to round off our presentation, we want to close with a few points on the lessons we've learned, lessons which we feel are helpful to bear in mind when moving to employ any AI analysis tool for qualitative research. Positively, we have experienced a huge change in not only the number of comments and surveys analysed, but also the insight gained from them. Students rightly expect their feedback to be heard and something done about it. Otherwise, why ask them for it? We can now listen to and act upon the feedback that students provide and that they have historically been asked to provide, but where there has been little done about it. So with a broader range of analyses has come an increased understanding of the bigger picture of the student experience at Westminster. You'll remember I started off this presentation by saying our student body is extremely diverse, and therefore the experiences therein are also extremely diverse. More readily can we, as a centralised team, inputting into better practices and strategy direction, triangulate data sets and identify instances of crossover, contrast or clarity between the university's approaches. What we're now able to do is utilise the wealth of feedback in evaluative practices, championing the generation of type 2 and type 3, so empirical and causal evidence through its use. And so we move forward with our work in promoting the importance of robust data and evaluative practices across the institution, and as a centralised department working towards meeting our strategic aims and institutional priorities, we're also able to deliver upskilling sessions to colleagues across the university, improving the general understanding and use of available qualitative and quantitative data to inform micro, meso and macro level decision making. Part of our ongoing task is to inform colleagues about what Millie is and how it can be leveraged for effect. The institutional research team has developed guidance on the minimum requirements for its purposeful and impactful usage, a helpful tool for those seeking to use our robot, as we've been asked before. It is this intra-team reflection on our own experience that leads us to the following few and final points. First, Millie uses a process of deductive coding. It works to predefined themes and won't code what it can't understand. So utilising the program's glossary feature to clarify institution-specific terms, even down to acronyms of rooms, is key. and informing its coding with your own institutional knowledge of the university aids the process greatly. The output, number 2, of any AI analysis tool is only as good as the input. So this might be less of an issue for external surveys where wording has been tested and survey structures are sound, but in instances of especially one-off ad hoc internal surveys, insight can be lost due to poor design. And we've worked with colleagues to upskill them in survey design and data cleanliness and preparation for analysis using an AI or machine learning tool. Number 3, Millie can't and shouldn't replace human contextualization. Uploading a dataset to Millie is just one part of the process. Our institutional research team's skill set in thematic analysis, our prior knowledge of datasets, and our experience in inductive and deductive coding provide Westminster with our source of human input, interrogation, and validation of the AI analysis. Our team can spot discrepancies between human interpretation and AI interpretation and feed this back into the AI model, continually improving its accuracy. We've also found it useful to review any uncategorized data to evaluate the performance and accuracy of the model that we work with, reviewing any specialized text that may need to be included in the glossary, and for any institutional specific topics that have not yet been identified by Millie that we can add into our coding framework. And 4th, there must be action with accountability. Millie gives our team a greater capacity, so we increase the number of qualitative datasets that we analyze. However, without action and accountability, our outputs will not realize their potential. So there needs to be, and there is continually, a growing culture shift in listening to qualitative insight and actioning the insight thereafter. Therefore, it's extremely important that from the get-go, there's buy-in from stakeholders with that decision-making responsibility, and it's needed to make the most of a tool like this. Creating space within our team to support data-driven action has not only promoted us as a viable source of expertise across the institution, but it means that as time goes on, we continue to support the culture of data-driven decision-making at all levels and across all projects. So as a team, we've established ourselves as expert internal consultants who can contribute to or run the evaluation of interventions or initiatives to better understand the student experience and the outcomes. With our increased capacity to conduct analysis and evaluations has come an increased awareness of the data collection process across the institution. So despite being centralized and managing many data sources, we often weren't aware of the localized administering of surveys, especially in an institution like ours with a devolved college and school structure. This is one complication of that structure. More often than not, we were only made aware of these surveys when asked to do any analysis on them. So our implementation of Millie has indeed meant that we're approached more often for this purpose, but it's also freed up time to audit the survey landscape at Westminster. The purpose of this work is to improve institutional research at the university by identifying commonalities between surveys and their data sets, and thereafter working towards avoiding the duplication of data and particularly survey fatigue in our students. This is being done with a particular focus on emphasizing the current availability, quality, and potential usage of institutional data, reducing the need for localized surveys to be conducted. Additionally, as another avenue of where we're now going, we're seeking to increase the input of institutional research and our team as a resource available to colleagues across the university who can input into the design of any research process, assuring alignment with A, institutional priorities, and B, contributions to our APP and our TEF submissions. We're also working towards ensuring that colleagues with whom we share qualitative data done through Millie's dashboards know how to use that tool effectively. We're working to establish Millie as a source of historic qualitative data for colleagues across the institution by utilizing the guest user function, which we have found to be very, very successful so far. Through this, we provide access to principal qualitative datasets to colleagues at varying levels of required access to aid the year-on-year comparison and trend analysis that we would usually conduct only using quantitative data. And we continue to work with colleagues through information, advice and guidance sessions and documentation to ensure confident and purposeful use of the data now presented via Millie, and also to ensure that what we receive and what we can use Millie to do is use it with the best quality data, regardless of the need required. Thank you.